In today's video, I'm going to give this student some feedback on his review. And even though this is a beginner learner of English, I think this is actually quite a very good review. So this is the review, and if we look at structure, I think this person has done a great job. We have an introduction, which is rather short, but that's fine. We have a summary. There are two arguments that are displayed in two different paragraphs, which are very good. And there is a conclusion about the book that gives a recommendation. So that's very good. The structure is definitely a very high mark. As you can see, there are some language issues. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the way this person refers to the book. In general, in writing, when we refer to books, we always do this in italics. So here we have the title, The Lord of the Rings, and we need to change this into italics. So it becomes like this. And I've added the capital letters as well to the word Lord and Rings. And I'm going to change this throughout the entire work. So after I've done that, we can now change things on a more deeper level. So let's start with the introduction of this review. It reads very well. It says The Lord of the Rings is a fantasy novel that's made within a medieval setting. It is widely considered as the fantasy novel. It was published in 1954, 70 years ago, and yet is still popular to this day. Now I like this introduction because it's very short, yet still kind of broad, but still very specific. Everything is about The Lord of the Rings, and I like that. And we have a few mistakes that need changing. So it says The Lord of the Rings is a fantasy novel that's made within a medieval setting. And we can change this into a different construction that says that's set in a medieval setting. Now that's not the best way to say this probably, but if you know something better, let me know in the comments. It is widely considered as the fantasy novel, which is nice, I think. It's a very good thing to say. It was published in 1954, 70 years ago, and yet is still popular to this day. And what we can change is we can say that it is widely considered as the fantasy novel. Now, of course, you need to read that with emphasis. And what we can do is we can change the wording in such a way that we include the emphasis without using those quotation marks. So what I'm going to say is that it is widely considered as the pinnacle of fantasy novels. And that means that it's the absolute best of the best when it comes to fantasy novels. So that's very good. Then I want to say that I want to change the order of this introduction a bit. I want to start with the fact that it was published in 1954. I'm going to take away the 70 years ago. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that although the book was published in 1954, it is still popular to this day, which we can change into today. Then I'm going to change the structure a bit because I want to create one very long compound complex sentence. And that's very good because if we do that, we show that we can play with the language and that we're more experienced writers. So if you want to improve your writing as well, try doing this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this sentence about it being the pinnacle of fantasy novels, and I'm going to paste it at the end of this sentence. Now, I didn't change much other than this structure, and as I said, I want to create a compound complex sentence, and that means that I need to combine these two sentences together. How am I going to do that? Well, basically with a coordinating conjunction, one of the fanboys. And I'm going to combine them with and. So I'm going to say it is still popular today, and it is widely considered as the pinnacle of fantasy novels. And now we have an introduction that consists of two sentences. One of them is a compound complex sentence. Now what you could do, of course, is include some sort of thesis statement, but since we already have 526 words, I don't want to add too much to this review. But if we had more words, I would definitely add a thesis statement to kind of indicate what we're going to talk about in this review. Next, we need to work on the second paragraph, and that is our summary. Now, a summary of a book review doesn't need to be very long. Remember, book reports give a lot of information. A book review is more focused on your argumentation. What do you think of the book and what's your opinion? Now, in this summary, which looks very good actually, we don't need to change that much. There are more language issues than content issues. So let's edit some of those issues. The book follows the story of Frodo Baggins, and we want to include a capital letter for the word Baggins because that's his last name. Then we get 50-year-old hobbit, and since 50-year-old, the entire chunk is an adjective, we need to add hyphens between each element. Otherwise, we won't have a good adjective. So we get 50-year-old hobbit. And hobbit is with double B. Inside a young one's body. So what we want to say is that this hobbit is inside this older hobbit is inside the body of a younger hobbit. So I'm going to change this slightly into 50-year-old hobbit captured inside the body of a young hobbit. It is the story of Frodo's adventure. We need to add a capital letter for the word Frodo to destroy the ring which Sauron, an evil god, is wanting. Now there are some grammatical things we need to do, and one of the first things I want to change is wanting. Now this is present continuous tense, and we don't use present continuous for something that is a fact. It's a fact that this person wants this evil god wants this ring. So we need to change it into want, present simple, and because Sauron is a he or an it actually, it's wants. And to make it less wordy, we can remove the word which, because we don't need that. And then we get the sentence, it is the story of Frodo's adventure to destroy the ring Sauron, an evil god, wants. And I think this works excellently. Now what we could do is, if we want to improve our language even further, we could use the word adventure and change it into something else. So change it into quest. So it's Frodo's quest to destroy the ring Sauron, an evil god, wants. And then we get the Fellowship, a group which desires to destroy the ring too, faced many trials and tribulations along their journey. So what I can change here is definitely the word fellowship into something with a capital letter. And then we remove the to from the end of the sentence. And I'm going to say a group which also desires to destroy the ring. And then we can say that they faced many trials and tribulations along the journey. We don't use along here because along is usually used with locations and journey is not a real location. So we don't use along, and we can change it into all through the journey. And I think we can even say all through their journey, because we talk about a specific group of people, the Fellowship. Now, one thing I'm going to change as well is the tense. Now, usually you would say that the summary in a review is done in past tense, so with past simple, past continuous, and past perfect. But because we already started in present simple, the book follows, I want to keep on using those present tenses throughout this summary. So I'm changing entered into enter, and they got kidnapped by and I think the rest makes sense. So they enter a dark mine from which they emerged with one less member than they entered with, which is a very difficult and wordy construction. And what I'm going to change is they enter a dark mine and they emerge, which also need to change into present tense. They emerge with one fewer member than they entered. We don't need the with there either. So they enter a dark mine and they emerge with one fewer member than they enter. So they enter a dark mine and they emerge with one fewer member than they entered. They got kidnapped by Barrow-wights, which needs a hyphen, scary creatures who are attracted by treasure, and also had to climb a snowy mountain from which they had to return to its foot due to unfavorable weather. Now, this is a very wordy sentence as well, so I need to change a few things here. Of course, we've added the hyphen to Barrow-wights. We have a typo, so scary creatures. And we don't use who when we talk about things. Creatures are things, and we usually use who when we talk about people. So we need to change that into which are attracted by treasure. So if we were to say, if we have this construction here, because of the comma we use here, and because of the fact that we talk about these scary creatures, if we say and also had to climb, it kind of seems as if these creatures had to climb a snowy mountain and then they had to return or something. And that's not what we want to say. So what we could do is we could simply add a comma, and that kind of solves the problem. And then we can move on by saying and also had to climb a snowy mountain, from which they had to return to its foot due to unfavorable weather. So we want to say that they had to go back down the mountain, and we can do that with the word descend. So we can change this into from which they, and we can remove from to make it a bit less wordy, which they had to descend due to unfavorable weather. Now overall this is a good summary, and this ending here is a bit abrupt. Now, I'm going to be honest, I haven't read The Lord of the Rings, so I can't finish the summary. But one of the things I would give this writer as feedback when it comes to content is end the summary with something more interesting, because I know nothing about the ring or the end of the book now. And I would definitely end with something that gives me a bit more information. Now we can move on to the first argument. And the first argument is that the book has a large amount of detail which depicts scenes and environments. So that's the topic sentence of this paragraph, and I assume that this person likes this element of The Lord of the Rings. We move on, and the level 2 sentence is: the author does a great job at describing every single land feature, shadow, formation, and etc. Now that sounds a bit weird, so I'm going to remove and etc. and say shadow and formation. Then this person gives a quote from the book, which is probably going to be the example, and we see that based on this part here is one of such examples of level of detail the book goes into. And I'm going to change this and say an example of this is, and then we have this quote, and then we can add this, or change this basically, this sentence here, into something like, which shows the level of detail the book goes into. Now, what the author does now is explain what the benefits are of such details. And he does this by saying said detail helps the reader imagine. And what we can do is make this a bit less wordy and say these details, that's more specific than said detail, help the reader imagine the scene clearly in his or her head. Now what we can do here is use singular they. And we can use singular they when we don't want to use this construction his/her. So I'm going to say their, singular they, which will help to improve the amount of immersion that the reader experiences, and that might greatly increase, there's the typo here, the amount of enjoyment the reader will experience. I'm going to remove some of these that's to make it less worthy. We don't know it. We don't need it because we have a subject here. So we can remove that if there's a subject in that dependent clause. And, you could say that we have some repetition. We have the amount of immersion and the amount of enjoyment. But again, because it's a beginner review, I don't want to change those things too much. And I'm going to leave the amount of immersion and the amount of enjoyment in this review. Then the author adds a level 5 sentence that kind of concludes everything. And they say that immersion takes the reader away into a world that is not our own, but the world of the author's making. In The Lord of the Rings, it is a world of fantasy, of magic, of adventure, which makes the reader imagine what it would be like to adventure too. I think that's a very nice level 5 sentence, and it kind of summarizes the main point and the benefits of these details. Now, what I'm going to change next in this sentence are the number of ofs, and we don't need that many ofs. We can say that it's a world of fantasy, magic, and adventure, which makes the reader imagine what it would be like to adventure too. And we can even make this less wordy by saying, which makes the reader imagine what adventuring would be like. Now, some might say don't end your sentences with prepositions. That's fine. That's something people say. I don't really mind, so I'm going to leave it like this. Now, I want to change one more structural thing in this sentence, because we have something like a comma splice here, because we've combined these two sentences without a conjunction. And the only thing I need to do is add and here. So we solve the comma splice by adding and. And then of course I need to add a comma after rings, because that's an introductory phrase. So, and in the Lord of the Rings, it is a world of fantasy. And I'm going to change it into this. We can add this here instead of it, because we talk about a world created by the author, and this will refer to that particular word. So we won't have what we call an unclear antecedent, because it's absolutely clear what this refers to here. Next, the author talks about the negative point. And interestingly, they mention that the positive point is also a negative point, because if you have too much detail, it kind of becomes a long-winded story, which is not what people like, especially not beginners. So I think that's an excellent argument to make, that you give something that you like, but that's also something that you don't like about the story. So it starts very nicely with for some, and we need to add a comma. The level of detail, it's too much. Now what we could do is we could add a linking word here to even indicate more contradiction. So we could say for some, however, the level of detail is too much. Some people have claimed that the amount of detail is overbearing, which is a nice word to use, and even detrimental to the reading experience. I think that's a very nice topic sentence, and we have a very nice linking phrase as well. So this is a very good topic sentence, linking phrase, and we could even say level 2 sentence-ish. Now there's one point of criticism here, and that's that this author says some people have claimed without giving a source. Now usually, especially in academic writing, this would not be correct. You can't say some people claim without giving a source. But since we have a beginner writing a beginner review, I think that's fine. For this level, it's acceptable. But if you're writing more difficult stuff, don't do this, of course. Next we get, readers have claimed that after they have attempted a rereading, which looks a bit weird, I would say. So we need to change it into this, a rereading. And then we need to add a comma. They couldn't finish a single book due to the mountain of trivialities the books have. That's a good argument to make. Such large amounts of elements might make potential readers shy away from the book, which is a nice construction, shy away. Regarding it as non-beginner friendly, which is bad for sales. Now this is a difficult construction, because when you read this, you might want to say, right, this book is not suitable for beginners. And then we get the construction non-beginner friendly, which kind of indicates that it's not friendly towards beginners, but more friendly towards people who are advanced readers. And I think we need to change this a bit. I like the construction non-beginner friendly, but I think it doesn't fit the context very well. So I'm going to change it into this. I'm going to change it into making it only suitable for non-beginners, which is bad for sales. While details can improve immersion and enjoyment, which is a nice link to the previous paragraph, they may also make for a boring novel for some. And I'm going to remove for some because it is a bit wordy. For the details, might make the feel like the story is just dragging on and on. So the first thing I'm going to remove here is the they, because we already have the details, so I can change it into this. For the details, might make the feel like the story is just dragging on and on. What I can say is I can use dragging on and on as a verb. So I can say, for the details, might just drag the story on and on and on. And I'm going to remove one. And some might even dislike details entirely, preferring, which is a spelling error, which the Microsoft editor found correctly, to have a fast-paced plot, and we need to include a hyphen here as well. So again, if you have two adjectives that both together form one adjective, fast-paced, we need to have a hyphen. And to make it less wordy, we can remove to have, preferring a fast-paced plot. We can start a new sentence here. And it says, nonetheless, a terribly slow plot drives off everyone. Now, I think nonetheless doesn't fit the context. I want to use a different linking word. So what I'm going to say is thus. And instead of saying that a terribly slow plot drives off everyone, I'm going to say drives off readers. And the amount of trivial things. And the amount of trivial things must be number, because things is countable, and because things is countable, we use number. And the number of trivial things that the author describes would put some off. So I need to add a comma here, because we have two different sentences. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a slightly less wordy by saying that the number of trivial things the author describes, I can remove that. And I'm going to use could here to decrease the level of certainty for this happening. So I'm going to say could be off-putting. Again, off-putting is used as an adjective here, so we need a hyphen between these two words. Now we can move on to the conclusion, and I think this is a very good conclusion as it is, and we need to change just a few language things. So, The Lord of the Rings is a great work of fiction that contains great detail, which is very nice. And we can remove this comma because we're still talking about The Lord of the Rings. So we still have the same subject, so we can remove this comma. And drags its readers, which is a typo, into the fantastical world of Middle-earth, which I think is where the book takes place. Middle-earth, where there are elves, dwarves, orcs, hobbits, and many more. And what I'm going to do is I can say, and many more mythical creatures. While this novel is probably not for beginners, we need to add a comma, it is a great read for people who are more experienced with novels, as readers might get overwhelmed. Now, I don't want to restate the same thing. I think the positive point is described elaborately, so what I can do is I can simply remove this final part and say that this book is a great read for people who are more experienced with novels. And what I can even say is that it's a great read for the more experienced reader. So I can say for the more experienced reader. I think both constructions would have worked in this case. So as we look back at this review, I think this is a very good and very excellent review of a basic review for beginners. Now this person has done, in my case, very well. I would have given it a high mark, even though there were some language issues. I think the structure is very good. I think the arguments make sense. I think there are good examples from the book that help the arguments that this author makes. If you want me to have a look at your review, let me know in the comments and I'll contact you on how you can, send me your review. If you found this video useful, please consider giving it a thumbs up. If you want to see me correct other works and, give feedback on other types of writing, check out my English Teacher Correcting Works playlist. For now, thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for my new videos, and I hope to see you in one of my next videos.